On August 3rd, the sky changes, and in the tradition of Vedic astrology, that quiet change may mark the exact moment something long buried inside you finally begins to rise. In the next few minutes, you'll discover what the lunar mansion called Ashlesha truly represents, why the sun crossing into it carries such intense symbolism, and what this kind of inner transformation can actually feel like. And near the end, there's one insight about Ashlesha that quietly reframes everything else. So stay with me until we get there. Why August 3rd matters. Let me start with the sky itself, because in Vedic astrology, the sky is never just background. It's a kind of mirror. In this ancient system, the sun's path isn't only divided into the 12 zodiac signs you already know. It's also divided into 27 smaller segments called nakshatras, the lunar mansions. Picture them as 27 rooms the sun and moon move through, each with its own atmosphere, its own emotional flavor. And on August 3rd, in the sidereal calendar that Vedic astrology uses, the sun steps out of one room and into another. It enters Ashlesha. Here's why that matters. These mansions don't all feel the same. Some are gentle, some are bright and outward, but Ashlesha has always been considered one of the most intense, one of the most psychologically deep of them all. Traditionally, it's tied to perception, to attachment, to instinct, and to the kind of truth that usually stays hidden beneath the surface of a life. So when the sun, the symbol of light and awareness, moves into a mansion associated with everything we tend to keep in the dark, the tradition treats it as a meaningful moment, not disaster, not a warning, an invitation, a turning point where attention begins to shift inward, whether you planned it or not. Let me be clear about one thing before we go deeper. Everything here comes from astrological and spiritual tradition, symbolic meaning, not scientific proof. The sun isn't beaming a special force at your nervous system, but symbols are powerful. They give us language for what we're already feeling, and this symbolism speaks directly to transformation, because that's what Ashlesha is really about. And to understand why, we have to look at the creature at the very center of it. The mystery of Ashlesha. At the heart of Ashlesha is the serpent. In this tradition, the mansion is ruled by the Nagas, the ancient serpent beings. Its symbol is a coiled snake, resting, watchful, full of quiet potential. And the name Ashlesha is often translated as the embracer or the entwiner, the one that wraps around and holds on. Already, the theme is forming. Closeness, attachment, something that coils around us and doesn't easily let go. But before your mind jumps to fear, pause. In this tradition, the serpent isn't a villain. It's one of the oldest symbols of wisdom and healing we have. Think about it. The snake sheds its skin. It grows by leaving something behind. It doesn't cling to the version of itself it used to be. When the old skin no longer fits, it simply releases it and moves on, more alive than before. That single image holds almost everything Ashlesha wants to teach. Renewal through release, growth through letting go. The serpent also stands for instinct, that deep, wordless knowing beneath our logic. For hidden knowledge, the things we sense but can't quite explain. And for a quiet, protective strength that guards what matters most. There's one more layer. In yogic tradition, the serpent is the image of Kundalini, a coiled energy said to rest at the base of the spine, waiting to awaken and rise. So Ashlesha isn't only about snakes as creatures, it's about dormant power, something curled up inside you that has been sleeping and may now be ready to stir. The serpent carries both poison and medicine. The same intensity that can wound is the same intensity that can heal. That dual nature is exactly why this mansion is considered so transformative. Nothing about it is shallow. So hold that picture, the coiled serpent, patient and awake, because now we bring in the other half of the story. We bring in the sun. What happens when solar energy meets Ashlesha? In Vedic astrology, the sun is the soul of the chart. It represents your core identity, who you really are beneath the roles you play. It's your vitality, your life force, your sense of purpose. It's confidence, clarity, and above all, illumination. Wherever the sun goes, symbolically, it shines a light. It reveals what was dim. Now imagine that light moving into the serpent's coil. For most of the year, in this tradition, the sun travels through mansions that pull us outward, toward action, achievement, the world of doing. But now it enters a space that points the other direction. Ashlesha turns the light around and aims it inward, into the parts of ourselves we rarely examine. This is the heart of the symbolism. The sun of awareness meets the mansion of the hidden. And in that meeting, the tradition suggests, our attention naturally drifts toward what usually stays beneath the surface, the patterns we repeat without noticing, the attachments we never question, the real motives underneath our choices. You know how a single honest thought sometimes arrives out of nowhere? A quiet realization about why you keep doing a certain thing, or why a certain situation always leaves you drained. That's the flavor of this transition. Not a lightning bolt, more like a light slowly turning on in a room you'd stopped entering. And it can feel significant because the sun doesn't just reveal, it clarifies. It brings that sense of, oh, I see it now. Things that were tangled start to feel more understandable. Things you'd carried without naming suddenly have a name. None of this is guaranteed to feel dramatic. For some, it's barely a whisper. But the tradition invites us to treat this window as a chance to look honestly, without judgment, at what's really been running the show. Because once the light is on, transformation has already quietly begun. The spiritual transformation begins. Here's the strange thing about real inner change. It almost never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives as a subtle shift in how things feel. Under themes like these, some people describe slowly losing interest in what used to pull them in. The same conversations, the same distractions, the same ways of filling time. Nothing is wrong, exactly. It just doesn't fit the way it used to. Like the serpent's old skin, it's still there, but you're already outgrowing it. Others notice a quiet pull toward solitude, a wish to step back, to be a little less available, to protect some space, just to think. You might question relationships you never questioned before, not out of anger, but out of a new honesty about how they actually make you feel. Or you might catch yourself mid-reaction and think, for the first time, why do I always do this? That flicker of recognition is what this whole transition points toward. You may grow more aware of your emotional triggers, more sensitive to what drains you and what restores you, more attuned to a voice inside asking for something more honest than the life you've been running on autopilot. Now let me say this plainly. Because it matters. Ordinary emotions have ordinary causes. If you feel tired, restless, or reflective right now, it doesn't automatically mean the cosmos is rearranging your soul. Sleep, stress, seasons, and ordinary life all shape how we feel. These aren't predictions. They're reflective themes, a lens you can look through if it's useful to you. But here's what makes the lens valuable. When you notice these small shifts, instead of ignoring them, they stop being random moods. They become information. They start to point somewhere, and the direction is almost always the same, towards something you're finally ready to release. Which brings us to the very center of Ashlesha's message. Ashlesha, and the art of letting go. Come back to the serpent one more time and watch what it does. It doesn't fight its old skin. It doesn't mourn it. It doesn't drag it along, just in case. When the time comes, it lets it fall. And the letting go is the growth. There is no version of the serpent that becomes new while still wearing the old. This is the art Ashlesha asks us to learn, because our growth works the same way. Sometimes becoming more of who we are means releasing something we've held for a long time, an identity we outgrew, a belief we inherited and never questioned, an expectation of how life was supposed to go, a habit that once soothed us, a resentment we've quietly been feeding, an attachment that used to feel like safety and now feels like a cage. And here's the honest part. These weren't mistakes. They protected you once. The old skin kept the serpent alive until it was ready for new skin. So this isn't about shame. It's about timing. What fit the old, you may simply not fit who you're becoming. So let me offer a few quiet questions. You don't have to answer them out loud. Just let them sit. What am I still holding on to, mostly out of habit? What would I have to admit if I finally let it go? Is there a version of myself I keep defending, even though I've already changed? And what might make room for something new if I finally set it down? You don't have to force an answer today. Sometimes just asking begins the loosening. The grip softens on its own, and once it softens, something that's been hidden tends to come into view, whether we feel ready for it or not. Hidden truths may become harder to ignore. There's a reason this mansion is tied to hidden things. And it's not secrets in some dramatic, cinematic sense, not betrayals waiting to be uncovered or disasters about to strike. The hidden truths Ashlesha points to are usually much closer to home. They're the truths about ourselves that we've quietly agreed not to look at. Most of us have at least one, a pattern we see clearly in other people but somehow miss in ourselves, a way we abandon our own needs, a story we keep telling that isn't quite true anymore, a situation we already know the answer to but haven't let ourselves fully admit. Under this kind of symbolism, those things get harder to keep in the dark, not because someone drags them into the light, but because you become less willing to look away. The sun's clarity meeting Ashlesha's depth tends to make avoidance more uncomfortable than honesty. And that discomfort, strange as it sounds, is a gift, because transformation almost always begins the moment a person is willing to acknowledge something they've been avoiding, not fixing it yet, not solving it, just admitting it's real, just saying quietly, "Yes, I see this now." That single act of seeing changes everything downstream. You can't release what you refuse to look at. You can't heal a pattern you won't admit you have. So the willingness to see clearly, even when it stings, is the doorway. Everything else follows from it. And here's the encouraging part. Seeing a pattern isn't the same as being trapped by it. The moment you truly see it, it starts to lose its automatic power. The unconscious becomes conscious, and what's conscious can finally be chosen or set down. But seeing clearly asks for something modern life rarely gives us. It asks for stillness, intuition, silence, and inner awareness. Ashlesha is deeply connected to subtle perception, that quiet inner sense that notices what logic tends to miss. But there's a catch. This kind of knowing is easy to drown out. It doesn't shout. It won't compete with a loud, busy, overstimulated life. To hear it, you have to slow down. So this is a beautiful window to practice exactly that. When you can, observe before you react. When something stirs a strong feeling, pause, even for a single breath. And just notice it before deciding what it means. Consider writing things down. Journaling turns a swirl of vague feeling into something you can actually read and understand. And if it appeals to you, spend a little time in stillness, meditation, a slow walk, a few minutes away from every screen. Not to empty your mind, but to let the quieter signals rise. Here's something important, and Ashlesha's intensity makes it especially relevant now. Not every strong inner voice is intuition. Sometimes what feels like deep knowing is actually fear wearing a convincing costume. Sometimes it's an old wound, reacting, or an impulse dressed up as insight. So how do you tell them apart? Real intuition tends to be calm, even when it's telling you something difficult. It's steady. It doesn't need to convince you with panic. Fear is loud, urgent, and usually pushing you to act right now before you've had a chance to think. When you slow down, that difference becomes much easier to feel. That's why silence matters so much during a time like this. It isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about creating just enough space to tell the difference between your wisdom and your wounds, and to let the wiser voice lead. But wisdom means facing all of ourselves, including the parts we'd rather not meet, the shadow side of Ashlesha. Every symbol has a shadow, and Ashlesha's is worth understanding honestly, not to frighten you, but so you can recognize it if it appears. The same serpent energy that gives depth and insight can, at its shadow edge, curl inward in ways that don't serve us. Traditionally, the difficult side of this mansion is linked to attachment that becomes clinging, a need for control, emotional entanglement that's hard to escape, suspicion, the temptation to manipulate rather than ask directly, obsessive loops of thought, and that familiar human struggle, the difficulty of letting the past actually be the past. Read that list, then hear this clearly. None of it is a prophecy about you. This isn't a warning that you're about to turn controlling or suspicious. These are simply patterns that can surface when intensity turns in on itself instead of being met with awareness. And that word, awareness, is the whole point. The opportunity here isn't to pretend these tendencies don't live in all of us. It's to become conscious of them, so they don't quietly run the show from underneath, because a pattern only controls you while it stays hidden. The person who can say, "I notice I'm trying to control this," is already freer than the one gripped by that need without ever seeing it. The person who catches an obsessive thought and names it as just a thought has already loosened its hold. So if you notice any of these edges in yourself during this window, don't panic and don't judge. Just notice. That noticing is the shift from being controlled by a pattern to being able to choose something else. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's simply the part of you asking to be seen. What you should do during this transformation. Let's make this practical, because insight without action tends to fade. If these themes resonate, here are some grounded ways to work with them. First, watch your emotional triggers with curiosity instead of shame. When something sets you off, treat it as a clue, not a flaw. Ask, what is this really about? The answer is often older and deeper than the moment in front of you. Second, be careful with unnecessary conflict. When intensity runs high, small things feel bigger than they are, and words said in a charged moment are hard to take back. This isn't a time to avoid honesty, but it is a good time to choose your battles and let the pointless ones go. Third, write down the thoughts that keep returning. The ones that circle back again and again are usually trying to tell you something. Getting them out of your head and onto a page makes them far easier to understand. Fourth, Choose one pattern to release, not 10. 1. Pick the single habit, belief, or attachment you know deep down is holding you back, and gently begin to loosen your grip. Depth beats scale here. 5th, protect your boundaries. Rest when you need to. Say no when you mean no. Let yourself step back and recharge without guilt. Transformation takes energy, and you can't pour from an empty cup. And finally, maybe most importantly, try not to make big, permanent decisions purely from temporary emotional intensity. Feelings in a window like this can run strong and fast. Let the wave pass. Let things settle. Then decide from clarity, not from the peak of the storm. The choices you make from a calm center will almost always serve you better than the ones made at the height of the feeling. None of this asks you to overhaul your life overnight. Small, honest, steady steps are exactly how the serpent grows. Your old identity may be losing its hold. Now we reach the part that tends to move people the most. There may be a quiet feeling during a time like this that the person you've been is loosening, that some old version of you is beginning to lose its grip. And that can be unsettling until you understand what's really happening, because transformation doesn't mean waking up as a stranger. You don't lose yourself. That's the fear, but it isn't the truth. The kind of transformation Ashlesha points to isn't about becoming someone completely different. It's about removing what was never really you in the first place. Think of everything you've absorbed over the years that isn't actually yours. The fears you picked up from other people. The version of yourself you built just to be accepted. The outdated beliefs, the borrowed expectations, the roles you play from habit rather than truth. Layer by layer, these can start to feel less like you. And that's the serpent again. When the snake sheds its skin, it doesn't become a different creature. It becomes more fully itself. It sheds what it has outgrown so that what's underneath, what was always alive under there, can finally breathe. That may be what's happening now. Not the loss of your identity, but the shedding of everything false wrapped around it. What's dropping away was never the real you. It was only the skin, and underneath it, quietly, something more honest has been waiting the whole time. The final revelation. And this is the insight I promised you at the very beginning. The one that reframes everything else. Through this whole journey, it can sound like transformation is something happening to you. Like the sun moving into Ashlesha sends a force down from the sky, and change washes over you from the outside in. But that isn't the message of this mansion. It isn't what the serpent teaches. The deepest symbolism of Ashlesha is this: nothing new is actually arriving. What's happening is that you're becoming conscious of what was already there. The patterns were already running. The attachments were already coiled around you. The truths were already true. The old skin was already loose. All of it was operating beneath your awareness the entire time. The transition doesn't create your transformation. It simply turns on the light. And that means the real work was never about waiting for the cosmos to change you. It was always 3 quiet steps, available to you in any moment. Awareness first, seeing clearly what's really there. Then release, letting fall what no longer fits. And finally, conscious choice, deciding, with open eyes, who you want to be from here. That's the whole secret. Not a force from above, but a light turned inward. The transformation was never coming toward you. It was waiting inside you. So if something in you is shifting right now, let it. You don't have to fear what falls away, because letting go of an old pattern doesn't erase your past. It doesn't undo who you were or make it meaningless. It simply changes your relationship with it. The past becomes something you carry lightly instead of something that carries you. August 3rd, the sun, Ashlesha, the coiled serpent, the light meeting the hidden. In the end, they all point to the same gentle truth. Every ending of an old self makes room for a truer one. Every skin you shed was only ever holding the shape of who you used to be. Whatever you're ready to release, you're allowed to let it fall. What's underneath has been waiting for you all along, and it's more you than anything you're leaving behind. If this spoke to you, leave a comment with 4 simple words. I release what no longer belongs to me. Subscribe if you'd like to move through more of these cosmic and spiritual shifts together. And if someone you love is walking through a season of change, share this with them. It might be exactly what they needed to hear today.